My parents told me directly to my face that I'll be no more than a baby factory until the day I die. So what do I have to tell them? Well, I tell them this. I want to say first, I have a difficult childhood, but not because of them. I was a happy kid who had friends and was kind of adjusted. But we were poor, jumped across the US about twice, and my siblings and father were all disabled. In different ways. Youngest sibling and dad hard of hearing. Younger sister had brain and back injuries due to malformation. Look it up, it's actually a very interesting disease. But when things started really changing was when I was in high school. Around my junior year of school, I met a dude, and we were best friends when dating. Newsflash, he was a terrible person. It ended in me and my sister getting a restraining order against him and both my siblings seeing and hearing things about me they should never have been exposed to. I graduated high school even though I probably should not have with my grades. I'm pretty sure my teachers just pitied me, and then after like a month I got diagnosed with ADHD, anxiety, and depression. Go figure, who could have guessed? I get on Adderall and it works great. For a day. Then it devolved into me having all-day panic attacks, vivid, extreme hallucinations, massive problems with an eating disorder, and an inability to control any emotion. It led to me backhanding my youngest sibling over a dispute involving the dishwasher that I still to this day would do anything to reverse if I could. I don't remember that 3 months or so period, so I've blocked out most of my memories because they were so mentally and emotionally taxing that just thinking about it makes me depressed. But at the time, I really thought my parents were doing everything they could to help me through that time. They could have done more, but I reasoned that they were working and didn't have all the time in the world to babysit me, so I should just handle myself. Eventually, all by myself, I decided to go cold turkey, and went through withdrawals which were almost as heckish as the actual medicine themselves. Looking back now, I realized that the only way my parents could have been more hands-off were if they've packed their bags and moved out. They didn't talk to me about anything. They didn't help me keep track of my symptoms. When I attacked my siblings, they did not protect me from them. Or me from myself. Now, as a 22-year-old new meds, my doctor just within the last month looked at my old records and was absolutely appalled because they started me as an 18-year-old who was very new to medicine and sensitive to them at a dose for grown adults well into their Adderall usage. She told me they started me off at around 25 milligrams, when she normally prescribes 5 milligrams for new users. So, they did not advocate me at all during this mentally traumatic time, immediately after being traumatized for almost a year. They took me to a therapist who noticed I was writing a story with an obvious self-insert and very influent storylines from my day-to-day life. When she asked to see my drawings and everything the next time, my mother pulled me away from therapy, saying something I still remember to this day, and I quote, "I didn't send you here so she could ask about your stories. I sent you here so she can talk about how your ex messed you up. She's not doing this fast enough." Well, comes the end of summer, and even though I was still struggling with leaving the house just for a Walmart trip, they sent me to school for college, all the way across the state, basically just wiped their hands clean of me. I went into survival mode, believed my parents were right and I needed this, so I did my best to fake it till I made it. I shouldn't have been there, but in the long run, it's what saved me. My friends I met there are some of the people who I've chosen as family, and I met my current fiancé while they were there through friends. Funnily enough, I wasn't allowed off campus, even though my parents lived about 2.5 hours away and would have not known otherwise. It took convincing from one of my friends to go about 2 hours in another direction. Well, It was where I met my fiancée. My parents really did not like Connor, but they did like the free labor he did for them and how mature he was to keep me in line. For them, that's how they said it. Now they could pawn off the driving around and emotions on him, because they never bothered to teach me how to drive or get a job or even regulate my emotions. Connor could do all that quite well, though, so they let him teach it to me. But whenever the idea of him got brought up as my boyfriend, they would clam up. They didn't want me to date anyone, not after my ex. I thought it was them just worrying about me after a traumatic period, and I was grateful for it. Connor helped us move like 5 times. He did free things for my parents all the time, and he was nothing but respectful the entire time he's known them. But eventually, they moved to the same city I was going to in college. I was going through a hard patch again. This is when COVID had hit at the end of my freshman year, and now they were living here in my college town. I started half online school for my sophomore year. Living with my parents again was absolute hell. I was used to it at this point, living in a dorm, and I wanted to come and go as I pleased. My friends got me rides, and I fought to get a job. Until one day I applied anyways and started working at McDonald's. I was doing terribly in school. I didn't want to be in school anymore. Distance learning was difficult for me, and they weren't doing anything to help. I was slowly becoming thoughts of hurting myself, and I wanted nothing more than to find my own place. During this time, my dad was constantly working overtime, and one day when I was probably at my lowest, he made a joke and said this: "Picking up all the overtime just to get away from me." Yeah, he said those words to me, and I still remember it clear as day. I was mentally declining and becoming more and more erratic as time passed because, well, to be honest with you, I was spiraling out of control again, and they just sat by and watched it happen while continuously judging me and making backhanded comments as I did. All the way up to this point, I was not known for fashion or hygiene. I was constantly self-conscious and did not have control of my ADHD, so I was never one to doll myself up. But me and Connor, we were going to go on a date. So I grabbed my prettiest dress, some tights, and my favorite flats and did my hair all nice and even tried makeup. I felt so pretty, and Connor was showing me with text messages filled with compliments as he was on his way to pick me up. My mom and siblings got there first. My mother took one look at me and told me to go change. She busted out laughing and was in hysterics over my outfit. She couldn't calm down, and the reason she was laughing was because I'm a big-chested girl, and I've gained weight as of recent because of my eating disorder was flipping from anorexia to binge eating. None of my clothes fit me, to say it easily. I was in tears and just put on my normal jeans and hoodie in almost 80-degree weather and ran to Connor car in tears. They kept trying to call me back into the house, but I just had him drive off without speaking to them. I didn't stay the night at their house for almost 2 days. Mom spent that first night texting me that I was overreacting, and that none of the clothes fit me, and yes, she could have been nicer, but honestly, I need to be realistic about my fashion, if I'm going to attempt it. If you couldn't tell at this point, my mom, and, well, she's picked out almost every piece of clothing I own because I wasn't anorexic anymore. She was very upset whenever I showed skin. Day-to-day life was getting worse by the day, but eventually I opened commissions. I posted on Facebook for family. Nobody replied, but my estranged grandmother on my mother's side was asking for an insanely difficult piece. I draw mostly pretty women in specific poses, with pens or pencils, and that's it, especially back then. She asked for a landscape drawing of her childhood home and a realistic water cooler drawing that she didn't have any references of and hadn't seen since she was a kid. It was easily worth close to $150, maybe more because I'm terrible with commission prices. I offered it for $60 and my mother asked if I was serious. I told her that 1, I disliked this woman to the point of purposefully not contacting her for almost a decade, and 2, this was so far out of my comfort zone that I would have to learn new skills just to make it. And it's more than half of it. Then my dad texted me asking if I was serious. It devolved into a crapping contest on who can be colder and how fast I can move out. I wasn't pleased. I'll be the first to admit that I was mentally unstable and lashing out at everybody. But I was also still a child who was recovering from the toll of drugs I was over, and it was definitely overprescribed and their emotional indifference during a freaking pandemic. I emergency moved in with my fiancé, then boyfriend, and our friend who introduced us, and didn't even speak to them for a week. This is the beginning of their pattern that they pull literally to this day, regardless of the situation. So, they finally texted me back after about a week and a half, and acted as if nothing had happened. They hadn't kicked me out, and I hadn't fought with them for days at that point, and we hadn't exchanged some of the meanest glances and short phrases of our lives to each other. Oh no, they wanted to talk about the football game and trivial things in their lives. I didn't know what else to do. It was my family, and they were giving me the pass to let back in after I'd mentally prepared myself to be shunned forever at this point. Of course, I took the olive branch. Maybe we'd speak about this in the future and laugh at how stuck up we've been. It could all change for the better, maybe. Me and my fiancé lived there for a year or so before we contemplated moving to the town we had met up in and he grew up in. His whole family was there, and our current apartment was crawling with drug dealers. People stalking us for his old car, and people taking craps in the hallway. Yeah, it was that bad. It was only an idea at this point, though. Nothing concrete. But when I floated the idea to my father one day when he was driving me home, he went on some sort of rant about how I would, quote, become a baby factory for Connor if I moved away from my support system and his family would turn me into their pawn, because I was frankly too mentally weak of a person not to be swayed by them. He wanted for a long time and just dumped a lot of info at random talks about how he kind of regretted having me and my siblings because he had us at so young and he regrets moving across the country like we did because of money problems. I asked him if he just told me that he regrets having us and living in this state, and he said, "I did not just say that. Don't you put words in my mouth." So, I went into my apartment and sobbed for a good few hours. Connor was mad, but was optimistic, because at least he was talking. We both wrote off the bad parts and tried to move forward, hoping that this meant that he would be open to talking more often in the future. We moved to my fiancé's old home. Things were fine for a while. The longer I didn't live next to my family, the more I realized that I've mentally could not handle them anymore. They've been so mean and gaslighting for so long. Slowly but surely, I was feeding my parents the info diet, and I was placing boundaries. There were a lot of mean-spirited comments thrown my way. They used Connor for more labor during this time than keeping him at arm's length, and refusing to acknowledge that we were serious and looking to move in together. Nothing of significance happened for about a year and a half until within last year. Keep in mind, it's 2022 now, and me and Connor have lived together for almost 3 or so years together. We're living out in our own home, and I'm working 2 jobs, and we're both very happy. Stressed, but happy. Mom texted in our group chat that she wants me to give up my jobs and move back to their town and become a mailman like my father. She swears that it's a government job with government pay and benefits, and it's the best that I can do as a, quote, college dropout who's working 2 jobs. I replied back that I was making almost $1,300 a paycheck with both jobs, and I just moved into my house, and that the town she lived in was absolutely terrible. Remember my old apartment? That's all that's available there, and I was not keen to move back now that I've lived in a 3-bedroom house that's completely quiet and all my own. At this point, she responds by calling me 4 times in one day, spam texting the group chat, and spams my direct messages, and sends Connor multiple texts and then calls me again. So, I spent 2 days ignoring her before I finally replied. I answered her calls, and she spent almost the entire time during a 15-minute call that I put on the speakerphone for Connor to listen to quietly. She was trying to manipulate me by calling me again, a college dropout, and telling me that I'm not happy there. I'm so far away from family, and there's no point of even living there. Especially since my jobs were working me to death, and they had nowhere that the benefits of this mail carrier job, since it's a government job. I didn't have the heart or the verbal space to tell her that the U.S. Postal Service is in fact not a government entity. It was privately owned, Mom. I did tell her that all of the benefits I would not need till I was 26. I had all the supposed benefits from Dad also having the same job. At this point, she glossed over that and talked over me, trying to explain how miserable I was in that town. I told her I had to go, and I hung up the phone. Thanksgiving rolls around. My entire extended aunts and uncles on my dad's side come and stay with us. Things are looking good, and I'm having fun with my family for once. Then I overheard my mom whispering to my uncle that, quote, "My entire personality is just Connor. I don't have any semblance of self anymore, and I even moved away to just become Connor's little girl." My uncle, well, he didn't react, didn't say anything. But I had to hide the way to compose myself because I almost went nuclear and absolutely lost my mind. Another time skip. Now we're in the present and getting closer to the end of the story. Connor proposed to me the day before Christmas Eve, surrounded by his incredible loving family by putting my ring in my stocking. It was absolutely beautiful. The first person I called was my best friend, and then the second was my mother. It was close to 1 a.m. around this time, and I got her on the phone. I told her, "I'm sorry, I know it's late, but I'm engaged." She told me in no uncertain terms, and I quote, "Honey, that's amazing, but don't text in the family group chat or anything because your dad's asleep and he has to get up at 5 a.m. Congratulations, I'm going back to bed." Neither of them contacted me about my engagement for almost a week, until I went back for their Christmas. I went with my best friend, and the entire time my family talked down to me, misremembered my size, and instead of apologizing, they insisted I didn't know my size and that I was indeed a double XL. I'm a medium to a large, and started the night off by my mom mentioning my engagement only once. It started off with my mom suddenly in the middle of things going good and everyone laughing. She starts cackling and goes, Oh, your dad and his friends have the funniest thing to say about your engagement. Dad, show her the text." Dad just smiled and he starts giggling to my siblings laugh along with them, and Dad says, "Oh, Amir, just thought it was nuts that you were engaged 'cause you're so young." I asked to see the text. Maybe I misunderstood him. They had to be something funny based on their reactions, because they were so much more funny than I thought. Especially when I had my best friend sitting right here listening. If anything, it was embarrassing. So, I read the text message and it goes something along these lines. The friend says, "Dude, she's engaged? That's nuts. She's so young and she's going into this way too quickly." Father replies, "I know. I'm upset and struggling right now because my kids are all forcing themselves to grow up right now when they aren't ready to, and it's hard to stand by and watch them crash and burn like they inevitably will and do nothing about it." I just smiled because while they all laughed and giggled about how funny that was, I was struggling not to burst into tears and just scream at them. My friend pulled me aside and asked me multiple times if we should leave. At the time, I was using their car, so I told her no. I was going to play nice until I could give it back, and then once it was in their hands again, I was going to go no contact. Connor was supposed to come down and see them and spend Christmas with them, but he couldn't face them knowing that this is what they willingly showed us, especially after Thanksgiving. After this, I bought a car. My first car that's all mine. And I got their car back to them just last week. I'm putting my life together. I'm learning how to do the beginning of the adult things well past when I should have. I learned to drive, pay bills, budget, spend, and how to exist all from my fiancé. I had to forcibly teach myself how to manage my own mental health with the help of my fiancé and friends. I'm done making up excuses as to why I need them in my life. I don't want to deal with the body shaming, the classless behavior, the looking down on Connor for reason. I can't handle it anymore. I called my uncle, the one from Thanksgiving, and explained to him my decisions, and he immediately told me he supports me, and that my parents don't know how to treat us like adults, that I'm not a screw-up, and that was the first time in my life that I realized that my parents had conditioned me into thinking I was in fact a screw-up. Well, so, Mom or Dad or anyone in the family, if you find this, these are the reasons why I blocked everybody's number and deleted Messenger, why me and Connor have our statements and info ready for when we send you a welfare check to tell them to leave us alone. I'm going to get married and you won't be there. I won't let you. If I have a child, you won't see them. I don't care how much you cry and make me feel like I did something wrong. I'm not a bad person for being screwed up, and the things you hold over my head were things I did as a drugged up child. A child that you should have protected and should have protected my siblings from. Duck you, and duck all your attempts at communication that you never did, but you say you have. And thank you to anyone who read this. I really just needed to yell. When they eventually find out that I cut them off because I've made no warning beforehand, I was and just dipped out after the car was no longer in my hands. I know that they're going to freak out. If anything memorable happens, I'll make an update, but probably not. Wow, that was a lot to take in. Absolute roller coaster of a story. Let me know your thoughts about this one, and let's take over with some comments. The best revenge is a life well lived, and you're living well. Congratulations not only on your engagement, but your freedom as well. You've accomplished so much in such a small amount of time, despite your parents desperately trying to drag you down. That's amazing. You're amazing. I wish you and Connor all the happiness in the world. And that's when highlighted comment number 2 pops up and says this. Sometimes the most toxic people in life come from the closest to you. I'm glad you managed to recover, OP, and are on to a better and brighter things. I would go no contact as well, and I hope you have a good wedding. So guys, let me know your thoughts about those comments. Drop them down below. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. Have an amazing day, and I will see you tomorrow.